welcome. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for participating in our episode 4 of our Oceans Update webinar series. Today is the human shark equation. My name is Sabrina Severin, and I am our Diventures Ocean Health Education and Conservation Coordinator. I received my master's degree in marine conservation from the University of Miami and have been with Diventures for a little over a year. I'm really excited to introduce you to our host today, Dr. Alex Brylske. He's been doing a phenomenal job with our webinar series. So for anyone who's new today, I hope you are excited to listen to all of his knowledge. Dr. Brylske is the founder of Ocean Education International, which is a consulting firm focusing on environmental education and professional development for the marine tourism industry, specializing in the recreational scuba sector. He is currently the Director of Education at ReefSmart, and he's also the author of The Complete Diver and Beneath the Blue Planet, which can both be purchased at your local Diventures. Dr. Brylske holds a Master of Arts in Instructional Systems Design, a Master of Science in Marine Biology and Coastal Zone Management, and an EDS and PhD in Science Education with a technical specialty in oceanography. He has a unique and diverse background that combines education and marine conservation, and we're really excited to share this knowledge and passion with you today. I hope you enjoy the webinar and the important information shared. Dr. Brylske, the floor is yours. Let's talk about some sharks and humans. Woo.
Thank you, Sabrina. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Well, welcome to those who are here for the first time, and welcome back to those who have been with us for the past few times. If you have been with us a couple of times, then you know that we tend to follow a little format here in terms of our sequence of events. I want to talk a little bit about in the news, a couple of interesting and actually a local issue, and then get into the main topic today, which, as Sabrina mentioned, is what I call the human shark equation. And I thought we would finish up today in the travel log by looking at the Bahamas, one of my favorite places in the world. So let's get started then, specific with the news part. Some of you in the Omaha viewing area may have actually seen this on the NBC affiliate. It ran on March 16th. And what's happening there, back in the about 10 years ago, there was a horrendous epidemic of what was called starfish wasting disease. Now, by the way, just in terms of accuracy, we tend to use the term sea star because starfishes are not fish. But anyway, this disease struck the West Coast with virulence and wiped out enormous numbers of sea stars. And in particular, the largest sea star of all, the sunflower, as you see depicted there in the image, to see just how big these giants can get, were virtually eliminated in much of their range. They were devastated to a great extent. And it turns out, as is the case in many ecosystems where sea stars are prevalent, they're major keystone predators. They basically help control the ecosystem in a very, very extreme way. And so their demise and the resultant proliferation of their prey species, sea urchins, has really devastated kelp forests throughout the West Coast. And so one of the things that's being done now is restoration efforts. And it turns out your own Henry Durley Zoo, in cooperation with the University of Washington, has a very interesting and potentially quite significant aquaculture program to help replenish the populations off the West Coast. So I keep an eye out for that. That's an interesting development and kind of shows you just how connected things really are. We've talked a little bit about in the past coral restoration, and you had Dr. Peterson on with Secor, who talked about that at length. And one of the problems with the restoration, with the transplantation in what's called reskinning reefs, is when these tiny little samples are placed, as you see in the lower right there, they kind of are nice little morsels for a lot of different fishes, especially parrotfishes. And there's been all kinds of attempts to put cages over the transplants to give them a chance to kind of, get a little bit of a start. And interestingly, there was a recent experiment published in the journal I have indicated there, using an algae. Some of you may have seen. Here's a little bit of a video. This is an algae called Dictyota, and you see it quite ubiquitously. And the reason you see a lot of it is it's chemically protected. Fishes tend not to eat it because of that. And what this study did, it pulverized and dried the Dictyota out, and then used it to kind of feed the transplants. And it turned out it was quite successful in deterring predation from parrotfish. So it's an interesting little way of helping to improve the success rate of at least some of these transplant programs. Another issue I've talked about in the past, and it may seem like I'm somehow fixated on fish poo, but I think this really kind of shows how interrelated and complex coral reef systems are. And this study came out of Bonaire, or actually was published in a newsletter from Bonaire, where they found that fish feces were actually quite significant food sources. If you've dived on coral reefs, you may have seen this. An adult parrotfish can actually produce about a ton of sand per year. And in addition to the sand, there's other organic material, of course, that comes out. And they've found that, in fact, sturgeons and parrotfish are that's a particularly important food source for them, and that it provides a much more nutritional value than the algae that they tend to eat. And not to be outdone, a different study on the same topic looked at the lesions, the damage that's caused by fishes that bite or eat corals, looking specifically at parrotfishes, sturgeons, and also the butterfly. Butterfly fishes actually eat coral polyps, and it was found that their feces actually contain important bacterial components that that are likely to be probiotic to the corals. So once again, we kind of see that there's an interesting relationship going on here, and that coral reefs are very, very efficient in their keeping nutrients intact on the reef by recycling. And this is one of the important mechanisms by which that's done. Lastly, given that we're going to talk a little bit about sharks, there was a study done recently that looked at what's been referred to as the mistaken identity hypothesis for shark bites versus what the authors call prey exploration. Now, there's been a hypothesis that sometimes sharks mistaken a surfer, for example, for a sea turtle. And it makes sense visually. They look certainly the silhouette looks quite similar. But this paper goes on to take a different approach, and they attribute these types of what are called bump and run attacks as really just exploratory. And they make the point that sharks, of course, get no maternal care. Once a shark is birthed, it's on its own. And so they learn about their environment through the interaction that they have. And by biting is one of the ways that they do that. And so the hypothesis here is really these kinds of shark bites are a result of exploration. And it's probably based in part on essentially the personality of the shark. Some are simply more aggressive, more so, less so, et cetera. So bottom line, we're still learning a lot about the issue of human-shark interaction. And that's probably a good segue into our main topic today. And by the way, as previously, all of the references to these topics are on the website for the Ocean Update. So let's look at the main point today, what I call the human-shark equation. often discussions of sharks center around their physiology and biology, which is fascinating, and we may talk about that in a future program. But I'm going to talk about the connection with humans. And to do that, we want to start with perception. And the way Western and Eastern cultures perceive sharks is actually quite different. In the Western context, it's been this idea of a good shark is a dead shark. Goes back a long way. You kind of see two examples, Watson and the Shark by Copley and the Gulf Stream of famous Winslow Homer painting. The one on the left hangs in the National Gallery in Washington, and I think the Homer hangs at the Museum of Art in New York. But you can see how sharks have been depicted long before Jaws. And of course, Jaws was really the impetus for a lot of the interest in sharks. I was an active scuba instructor in the summer of '75 when the movie premiered, and I can tell you how difficult it was to recruit students that year. But even prior to Jaws, and in fact, if you saw Jaws, one of the famous scenes is where Captain Quigg talks about being a survivor of the USS Indianapolis. And that was actually a true story, as you see that she was torpedoed on her way back to the Philippines from delivering the fissile material to Tinian for the atomic bomb, and unknown to the Navy, the sailors floated around for 4 days, and quite a few were predated by sharks. Now, they weren't all eaten by sharks, as some have mistakenly assumed, but a number of them were predated by sharks. And of course, a lot of the sailors that died were eaten subsequently. But anyway, once that story got out after the war, it helped to feed this, image of sharks. And of course, what really, fed the flames was was first of all Benchley's novel Jaws, and then with Spielberg's movie. As they say, all hell broke loose afterwards. And we've been kind of recovering from that mentality for quite some time. It's also interesting to note that Benchley didn't just think this idea up, out of some dream, but it was based upon an event which occurred in July of 1916, where 4 people were killed, 5 were attacked, 4 did not survive, in a very famous event that made the headlines throughout America at that point. And it's still unknown whether it was a great white or bull shark. And if you want an interesting read, I would consider Finicola's book. This didn't get a lot of publicity because, unfortunately, July of 1916 was also the Battle of the Somme during the First World War. So this never really had a whole lot of legs in terms of its longevity. But anyway, it's just some perspective as to how we got and where we are. And of course, as the 20th century proceeded, the whole idea of 24-hour news channels having to fill their time, kind of a shift in journalistic ethics, and basically this whole mentality, if it bleeds, it leads, is really hyped this idea of sharks and their potential danger, to the point where, while you expect to see it in publications like, the National Enquirer, but a good example of how the mainstream press kind of buys into this was back in 2001, when Time magazine declared the 2001 the year of the shark. Now, statistically, there was nothing unusual about the number of shark bites that year, but some highly publicized events occurred in North Carolina and Florida that really kind of brought this to the public's eye. And we still, of course, deal with this now. Even today, here's just some examples. Here's a news item from CNN where they're talking about some, teenage girl that got bit on the foot while boogie boarding, and yet the image they use is a feeding frenzy. Likewise, the situation off Cape Cod, which has been ongoing for a few years, as marine mammal populations have recovered, so too have white sharks come to predate them. And, here we have the New York Times essentially buying into the same idea. So this idea in Western culture about, the good shark and the dead shark is a dead shark is quite prevalent. Even as much as we try, here's another example. This is a very interesting study that documented how tiger shark range has extended more northerly as the ocean has warmed due to climate change. And if you read the paper, you find that rather than stopping typically in the mid-Atlantic North Carolina range, they're now spotting tigers as far north as New York, et cetera. But here's how it's handled, at least on the other side of the pond in the sun. Massive tiger sharks could be swimming towards UK waters due to rising temperatures. There's no way in God's green earth that tiger sharks are going to significantly populate waters that far north of that cold. But again, if it bleeds, it leads idea. Now, the point I'm making, of course, is that while Western culture has this perspective, that's not necessarily, in fact, it's not the case at all in Eastern cultures. You see some examples here. The first in the Cook Islands in the Pacific and the second in Fiji, where sharks are actually respected and in fact deified. In the case of Ina, it was a myth that she rode a shark to the island in which she was able to reunite with her lover. And Dakwa is a shark god in Fiji. In Hawaii in particular, which probably has the most evolved shark mythology culture, sharks are actually considered to be, very important. The Mano Makau are shark guardians. They're thought to be reincarnations of people and who in turn protect the tribe or the family in the process. So very different perspectives. Real quickly on the issue of attack, I always like to bring to bear that if you take a look at the left, there is a list of the most dangerous animals in the world according to death by. And of course, mosquitoes are number one, with we humans number two. You will see sharks at the top of the list there at 10. And so the probability and the likelihood of any kind of attack is quite low. In fact, if you look at the Center for Disease Control, you've got a 1 in 3.7 million in one chance of being attacked by a shark. So the perspective is such that you got a lot more important things to worry about than being bitten by sharks. And this kind of gives rise to this meme that I think it probably sums it up. It's the most dangerous animal in the world with the white shark next to it. So bottom line, what we really have, rather than the sharks, declaring war on humans, is what we have really declared war on sharks. And it brings us to the issue of we've become too good at fishing, essentially, and that we really destroy a lot of sharks. You'll see the figure 70 million. If you really explore the data, a more recent paper pegs it at close to 100. And in fact, that same paper says, because a lot of shark fisheries are not reported, they're either illegal or the records don't exist, that it could be in the range of 2 million sharks. What that means is that about anywhere from 15 to 30,000 sharks are killed every hour of every day. So is there any question why there's a problem with their conservation? So the finning issue, of course, has become quite significant in this regard. I just wanted to talk a little bit about why that is, because why is it, for example, that this has been a relatively recent phenomenon? And the reason is explained by the little chart, which I'll get to in a second, but I want you to understand the fins are used in preparation of shark fin soup. And the fins are used because the supporting structure, which are called serratitrachea, are essentially the same material as your fingernails. And they're used boiled for hours upon hours to provide nothing more than a gelatinous texture to the soup. It's in turn flavored by other ingredients. But why has it become such a big deal? Because for centuries, actually for millennia, it was a dish for Chinese royalty. But why the problem? And the problem is explained, if I can get my cursor here, right here. One of the successes that has occurred in humanity in the past couple of decades is what we've done to reduce poverty. And you see here in 1990, what this is saying is about 35% of the world population survived on less than $1.90 a day. And in the subsequent decades, we've dropped that to only about 10%, which is a huge success for the human condition. However, many of those folks were Chinese who now have the discretionary income to buy this very prestigious soup, which can cost, by the way, about $80 to $100 a bowl. And so this enormous drive of consumer demand really gave the fuel to create the kind of demand that is fueling the demise of many species today. So why do we care? Of course, if a good shark isn't a dead shark, then what good is a live shark? As you may have heard, sharks, being apex predators in most circumstances, are going to cull wounded animals. They're going to keep the ecosystem healthier by taking out the weak. In fact, many of the fish that sharks predate would not really be caught by fishers, or if they were, they would be discarded anyway. And when these sharks are taken out, and I'll show you a video in a bit, in many ecosystems, they can create what's referred to as a trophic cascade, a catastrophic collapse of the food web. In fact, I hope this video, the audio works here, because I'll show you a quick video that kind of explains this.
For millions of years, sharks have played an important role in the marine environment. But around the world, shark populations are declining. This has serious consequences for our oceans. In the Pacific, scientists compared the conditions of coral reefs in relatively pristine, less populated areas with reefs that were heavily impacted by human activities, such as overfishing and habitat destruction. In the pristine locations, scientists found more stable, healthy coral reef ecosystems with a high abundance of sea life. These systems were dominated by sharks and other large predators. In areas dominated by human activity, where sharks have been overfished, changes were seen throughout the marine environment, including negative impacts on corals. Similar studies in the Caribbean have found that as sharks decline, other species such as parrotfish may also decline. Many corals depend on herbivorous fish, like parrotfish, to eat algae and allow new corals the opportunity to settle and grow. As populations of these fish declined, they were no longer able to keep algae growth in check. The reef shifted to an algae-dominated ecosystem, which lacked the diversity of marine species found in healthy coral reefs. These important studies show that fish abundance and thriving coral reefs are associated with healthy shark populations. Sharks need protection to maintain a diverse marine environment and healthy coral reefs.
Indeed, it's a good indicator. In every case where I've been on a truly healthy coral reef, I've seen sharks. I'll jump ahead a bit here and talk about another role that's rarely addressed. In ecology, it's called the landscape of fear, sometimes the ecology of fear. And all that it means is that aside from the direct impact of a shark eating, predating, and taking an organism out, it also has an effect upon the behavior and even the morphology, or the physical form of the fish. And this is just a study that was done in Australia, where it looked at the differences in fishes on reefs that were where sharks were eliminated due to overfishing, and areas where sharks were essentially untouched. and in fact found that the sharks the reefs where sharks were found, the fish had bigger eyes and bigger tails because they needed those features in order to avoid predation. And in fact, on reefs where sharks had been eliminated, lacking the need, the tail size and the eye size were smaller. So it kind of shows you one of the other indirect impacts. Similarly, they've done studies in Australia again, where they found that in areas where healthy tiger shark populations exist, that in turn predate on dugongs and turtles, then the seagrass meadows are healthier, because that fear of being predated changes the behavior of these herbivores to the point where there's more of the seagrass that's left intact. So the intricacies of this predator-prey relationship is very, very important. And it's one that we really can't ignore when we talk about the importance of sharks. Well, let's get to humans specifically. Physiologically, we really should pay a lot of attention here, because sharks are very, very resistant to disease, not entirely, but very resistant. Secondly, when we look at their evolution, their evolutionary clock, their rate of evolution is substantially slower than it is in other mammals. And these features alone provide potential insights that are very, very, potentially very important to humans. And I'll give you some specifics. Let's look at shark DNA. The genome of sharks is 50% bigger than the human genome. And what's really remarkable, if not bizarre, is there are a couple of genes in sharks that actually are shown to help in cancer resistance, which are also found in humans and make us cancer prone. Completely, bizarre. And in fact, it may be the fact that the genome of the shark is bigger, and hence the result. Other genes they have been documented as helping with DNA, for tissue repair, et cetera. And just take a look at this video. Look at this animal surviving, swimming almost, nonchalantly, with a wound that would probably have killed any other vertebrate. So we really should be interested in how these critters are able to survive in this way. By the way, in the photos, a lot of those wounds are resulted from mating, because male sharks will hang on to females in order to copulate. And in fact, female sharks have much thicker skin as a result. But these are perfectly healthy sharks. Now, one of the issues is our immune system, of course. A lot of the components for our immune system are manufactured in our bone marrow. Sharks don't have bones, so how do they deal with this? Sharks have an organ that no other vertebrate has, called the epigonal organ, you see illustrated here. And it's very likely that it's part of that reason, producing the compounds and the cells necessary for immuno response. So we have good reason to keep sharks alive. And then there's the issue of what we call biomimicry.
In the past few years, the field of biomimicry has exploded. Instead of developing innovative concepts from scratch, scientists have turned to nature for inspiration. Numerous ocean inhabitants develop growths of barnacles and algae on their exterior. Compared to these animals, sharks maintain clean, unblemished skin. Shark skin is comprised of millions of tiny denticles that form a pattern. We've taken inspiration from the microscopic textures on shark skin to design engineered surfaces that help control interactions of biological organisms like bacteria. A single human hair is roughly 100 microns thick. Each sharklet pattern is comprised of very small features, and each feature is 1/50th the width of a human hair. Adapting research pioneered at the University of Florida, we can manipulate micropattern dimensions for desired applications. elevator buttons, door handles, mobile phones, airplane seats, office furniture, hospital surfaces. Due to its versatile nature, Sharklet can be manufactured in almost any surface. Sharklet uses no toxic additives or chemicals that can contribute to health concerns and dangerous bacteria. Learn more at sharklet.com.
So even in ways unimagined, sharks are beneficial. There's been an enzyme synthesized from squalene, which is a chemical I'll talk about in a minute here, that has promise for cholesterol pharmacology. Squalene is a steroid that is produced in many sharks, particularly the liver. And it's used extensively now in a whole range of diseases from macular degeneration, and even now being looked at as far as research into neurodegenerative diseases. Fortunately, in fact, this was one of the reasons sharks were actually targeted, because the livers of sharks were valuable. It can be synthesized now, so there's no need for this. But it's an important lesson in what we can learn by keeping these animals alive. Now, with the COVID vaccine, another issue cropped up recently. There's another substance called squalene, which is not squalene, and this has long been used in cosmetics and other skincare products. But in vaccines, it's used as a booster, what's known as an adjuvant. And with the production of so much COVID vaccine in the past few years, there was concern that it might help drive, the continued slaughter of sharks. That apparently hasn't happened. But more importantly, squalene can be derived from plants. And so there is an effort now in the marine conservation industry to kind of make people aware of this issue, and to, if you are buying a product that may have squalene, to see that it's sourced from plants and not sharks. And then we come to an issue referred to as small antibodies. Small antibodies were found in llamas and camels quite some time ago. And without getting into a lot of detail, their structure allows scientists to do a lot of things in mapping proteins and doing all sorts of things. And they were more recently found in sharks. And now these nanobodies, which are derived from these small antibodies, are being used therapeutically in experiments to deal with a whole range of diseases, as you see listed here. And most recently, one of the small antibodies has been identified from a bat related to a corona type virus. So again, it's foolish for us to do things that don't keep sharks alive and thriving. We have, simply from a selfish perspective, too much to gain. Another example, Omnigraft. This is a artificial skin used for burn victims and ulcer conditions, people with diabetes, etc. And it's partly derived using chondroitin. And of course, the thing that many people are aware of are the supposed value of shark cartilage in preventing cancer. It's nonsense. It's been definitively, discredited. The idea that sharks don't get cancer is belied in the photos I'm showing you right now. They do. It's very rare, but they do get cancer. And in fact, because this myth still persists, there's a huge industry still for cartilage from both sharks and rays that really needs to be corrected. So bottom line, I just want to kind of bring to your attention that there are reasons we need these critters in the water alive and thriving, and to do otherwise, to do things that would thwart that, is just not in our interest, either from an ethical or practical selfish perspective, we need these critters. They're critical to the environment, and they're very likely critical to our own health. A couple things I'd leave you with. David Shipman, who was actually one of the technical reviewers for my book, published his own book, Why Sharks Matter. I would encourage you to take a look at that. It's a really it's a new perspective on things. And if you haven't, I think on Prime Video, Shark Water Extinction, Richard Stewart, the late Richard Stewart's film is highly advised. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about the Bahamas before we finish up here. You see, there are several trips upcoming, both land-based and boat-based. But let's talk about the Bahamas to begin with. There are the Bahamas, and there is the Tropic of Cancer. I always bring up the point that most of the Bahamas are not in the tropics. And by virtue of the Gulf Stream, the warm water necessary to support coral reefs, which extends as far north as Bermuda, really provides this kind of tropical environment. I also wanted to make a little bit of a couple things about the uniqueness of this area. And what you're seeing from this space image, get my cursor here. Come on, buddy. This is the island of Andros. And this extremely deep water is called the tongue of the ocean. It's over 10,000 feet deep. And in fact, the wall off East Andros, if it were above land or above water, it would be one of the tallest and sheerest vertical structures on our planet. It plummets to more than 7,000 feet immediately. And it's just one of kind of the unique aspects of the Bahamas. A couple quick facts. The Bahamas are not part of the Antillean chain. Let me make a point here. In past discussions, we've talked about Dominica and St. Lucia, which are part of the Antilles. These are the mountains I described and showed you how they were formed by subduction and volcanoes, etc. Unlike the Bahamas and even Florida were actually part of the plate when the Atlantic Ocean was forming, when the African and North American plates were split apart. Some of that remnant plate remained behind and formed the foundation for what today is Florida and for the Bahamian chain as well. So they are tectonically very different, and you'll see some consequence of that in a minute. So this is not an area of a lot of any volcanism, et cetera. They, of course, were settled by various tribes, the Lucayans, which were related to the Arawak. The Bahamas is where Columbus landed, although he thought he was in India or the Indies. Possibly, although it's not been confirmed to my knowledge, San Salvador claims that, but there's, it's evidence otherwise as well. Their claim to fame, of course, is this was really the center of piracy in the late 17th and 18th century, and there are amazing stories about that. And they were part of the British Commonwealth, or part of the British Empire up until their independence in 1973. But by the way, just to be accurate, down here are the Turks and Caicos Islands. Geographically, geomorphically, they're the same. However, when the Bahamas broke off in 73 to become independent, the Turks and Caicos Islands remained a crown colony. So you technically are two different countries. A couple other interesting things you're going to see here in this video, what's known as the Bimini Road from the air. And here in a second underwater. And these structures gave rise to the myth that this was remnants of Atlantis. And it's not. It happens to be a morphological structure. Turn the audio off. Resulting from deposition of limestone and the fact that the way that the sea bottom formed. But of course, it's driven a lot of myths and stories and TV shows on the myth of Atlantis. And the other famous geological aspect of the Bahamas are the stromatolites. This is from Highburn Key in the Exumas in the central Bahamas. Stromatolites are very important critters because very likely they gave rise to a lot of Earth's oxygen. And there aren't very many places on Earth where they're found, at least not in the ocean. In Shark Bay, Australia, and Exumas are the only place where they really are prolific. They occur in some saline lakes in South America as well. So again, it's an interesting and unique kind of a place. But shark, or rather the Bahamas is really shark diving central, and it's become an extremely important economic engine for many, many island nations, and even Florida here, as you can see just from the numbers generated. The Bahamas has kind of led the way in this regard because they recognized for decades ago that sharks could be an important resource alive and not dead. And I'm going to show you a quick PSA that they produced that kind of makes that point exactly.
We're looking at more than 20 years effort that finally comes together today as we move forward with ensuring that these wonderful creatures in this incredible habitat that we call the islands of the Bahamas are protected from being exploited and massacred.
The situation for sharks in the Bahamas is very different to the rest of the world. This is largely due to landmark decisions banning longline fishing in the late 1990s and the more recent establishment of the Bahamian Shark Sanctuary in 2011. The sustained national stewardship of these important species displayed by the Bahamian government has led to some of the most healthy and diverse shark populations in the world. The total national economic impact of sharks and rays on the Bahamian economy is estimated to be $113.8 million annually. The most important economic species is the Caribbean reef shark, which generates 99% of the revenue. However, the economic importance of three rarer species in the Bahamian outer islands is actually greater. Great hammerheads in Bimini, tiger sharks in the west end of Grand Bahama, and oceanic whitetips off the southern tip of Cat Island.
This first-of-a-kind NGO was on the leading edge of setting up the largest shark sanctuary in the Atlantic Ocean back in 2011.
Thanks to the hard work of the Bahamas National Trust, the Bahamas is now a shark sanctuary. This means sharks are fully protected and it's illegal to kill or harm them. I wish more people could experience and learn about sharks as they are important in keeping our reefs and fish population healthy.
Healthy oceans need sharks, and this leadership from the Bahamas National Trust is making a big difference.
The economic analysis they did showed that at the dock, shark fishers were bringing in on average about $2 to $3 a pound, whereas a shark alive over the course of its life would bring in almost $250,000 to the economy. And so it was pretty easy to convince the government that a good shark was not a dead shark. I think on all of the Bahamian trips that Diventures has planned, there'll be shark experiences, some of which will be fed, some not. And this is just some basic guidelines on awareness and basically common sense. And your operators, I'm sure, will give you specific instructions as far as acting in a responsible and safe way around sharks. Keep in mind that the operators of the Bahamas for almost 40 years have put more than 2 million people through shark experiences. And to my knowledge, while there have been some incidents with the handlers, there's never been a serious situation in the feeding arena. Other thing I wanted to bring to your attention, particularly to the instructors and the staff, there was a study done, as you see at the reference at the bottom there, where they were asking, of folks that participated on shark dives, what did they want? What more did they want? And overwhelmingly, it came back that, yeah, this was great and wonderful and spectacular, but we wanted to know more. And so I would just take that advice and really, provide a good educational experience in addition to, just an opportunity to see these absolutely amazing critters. people want to learn more. So utilize the tools that you have for shark education. I know there's at least one specialty program available from SSI that deals with this specifically. Also, in the back of my book, on pages 365 and 3 there is a rubric where you can kind of take a look at a shark dive experience and kind of rate it on a 24-point scale to see kind of where that operator is. And so there are ways of being responsible as far as shark diving is concerned. It's an amazing thing. I mean, these animals are just wonderfully complex and incredible to see. And with that, I just wanted to conclude. There was some questions that follow-up questions last time. We've been talking so much about coral reefs. Some of you really have a great interest, and I did notice that a few actually signed up. This is a free course that I've provided. The link is also on the update website, where if you want to really delve into coral reefs in a pretty in-depth way, this is about a 3-hour course that gets into meticulous details on coral reefs, and it is available free of charge. And I would encourage you to take a look if that's something of interest. And with that said, as I often tell you, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Do be aware that next month, due to a schedule conflict, we're gonna have the webinar a week later, so it'll be on May 24th, and we'll be looking specifically at becoming an ocean steward. So we're going to turn attention from the environment to our role in helping to conserve the environment, because we as divers can be really important factors in conveying a conservation message. Remember that we're one of the few folks that can see below the veil of waves and what's actually down there. We're really important sentinels for ocean conservation. And I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Sabrina and see if there were any questions. And thank you for your attention. Sabrina?
I actually had some questions while I wait to see if anyone else puts any in the chat. First, I wanted to say I'm really glad that you touched on that healthy reefs have sharks. Being here in Nebraska, I have a lot of friends that are scared of sharks or just new divers I know are hesitant on it. And I just try to give them the perspective, like, you are so lucky if you get to see a shark in the wild in their natural environment, like not even on a feeding dive. Like, it's just such a rare experience because so many of them are endangered and threatened. So just if you're ever hesitant on seeing sharks, like, please go in with the positive aspect that it is such a rare occurrence depending on where you dive, and that, I mean, who knows what's going to happen to them in the future. So it's just a really neat experience, and then you do know that you're diving on a healthy reef, so it's really awesome.
There was a global survey done with baited video traps. Basically, they attract the sharks to take pictures, and they did it on coral reefs, and they found that in 30% of the locations, they did not see one shark in the entire survey. And so sharks essentially have been extirpated from a lot of coral reefs around the world. It is quite rare to see them, unfortunately, in many places. So when you do see them, that's something that should go in your logbook.
Yes, for sure. But for my questions, I know you talked about DAWs and just the history of how the news kind of portrays sharks. And I just wanted to get your opinion on Shark Week, because in my graduate program, I had one professor who was very for it and even appeared on a lot of Shark Week specials. But then I had another professor who was against it just because of their negative portrayals. And I even, while you were doing your webinar, I just wanted to kind of look up last year's Shark Week program, and some of their programs that they ran were Great White Serial Killers, Clash of Killers. Like, I just want to know your perspective on Shark Week, because I've just heard mixed things about it. So I didn't know what your thoughts were.
There was actually a paper published, and I'll find it and send you the link to put on the page, where there was a peer-reviewed study looking at the consequence of Shark Week, and it was not good. My personal opinion is that I wish Shark Week would go away. And if you notice, Nat Geo has kind of responded, and they also do they don't call it Shark Week. It's not on the same time, but they've done I think a very admirable job. So my advice to people is to kind of keep an eye out for when Nat Geo does their thing, because I know last year in particular they had some wonderful programs. But I do agree that the sensationalism of Shark Week is probably doing more to perpetuate the myth of sharks than it is benefiting. So I have to come down on the con side as far as Shark Week is concerned.
Yeah, I agree for sure. And then my other thing that I just kind of wanted your opinion on was, in one of my courses, we spoke about, kind of also related to portraying sharks in the media, but how there could be more of an effort to rephrase the term shark attack and kind of recategorize it into like shark sighting, shark encounter, shark bite, fatal shark bite, like just kind of renaming it. What are your thoughts on that? Or have you seen any studies trying to push that further instead of just calling everything a shark attack when it could have just been someone seeing a shark or something?
Yeah, if you look in chapter 9 of my book, you'll see a sidebar based on a paper that was written, co-authored by actually one of my professors, Bob Huter. And the paper basically is a plea to media to stop using the term attack, because it implies intentional malevolence, and it's really not constructive to learning about sharks. And they have a criteria, or they have terminology that they hope to see. And you'll notice that in my discussions, you didn't hear the word attack. I talked a lot about bites. I mean, I did when it was appropriate, but it's not an attack, it's a fatal bite. The sharks are not out there seeking us out and malevolently trying to kill us. They are predating, or they're testing to see if we are potential prey. So I do think words do matter, as I say in that sidebar. And I'm seeing indications in media where there, at least some writers are taking that to heart and not just default using the term attack, because it's not helpful, nor is it accurate. Anything else?
Awesome, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions that they want to ask or put in the chat?
I'll ask. It always comes up on dive boats. Are sharks a danger to divers? And you get all kinds of crazy responses. There's shark dives in cages. There's people wearing whatever, the metal shark suits. When are, I guess you referred to it as testing. When are sharks? How can you avoid being tested by a shark for dinner? Is there anything with color, shiny things? People are always pointing out, boy, you got that blinky piece of metal hanging on your BCD. That's going to attract the sharks. Is that a bunch of fluey? How can you avoid being tested?
Well, let me give you some perspective, first of all. If you take a look at the populations that are at greatest risk, the top are surfers. Secondly, are swimmers. Divers are way down on the list. And in fact, if you eliminate people who are spearfishing, divers are almost non-existent in terms of people on the receiving end of a bite. So if you want to look at the statistical perspective, sharks pretty much ignore us when we're not doing something that invites their attention. I use to me, when people ask about sharks, I counter them with the question, when you go into the woods, are you worried about bears? And the real answer to that is, it depends. Where are you? There are some places in the world, when I'm walking, locally, I'm not worried about black bears in But when I was in Alaska a few years ago, you bet your bottom dollar I was concerned about grizzly bears. So there's an issue of what's the context, what's the behavior involved. So it's a difficult question to answer across the board. By and large, as Sabrina said, you should count yourself lucky if you see a shark, which is why I don't understand why divers are reluctant to see them. These are critters that have the capability of doing some serious damage. There's no getting around that. But when you look at the potential and the fact that, we have a huge advantage as divers in that we can see them. And in most cases, when predators recognize that advantage of surprise is gone, they're going to change their behavior. Certainly a lot of the larger sharks, that's been pretty much documented. So we are probably in the best position in terms of safety from shark bite than someone, paddling on a surfboard or, flopping around on the surface. And I just don't, I guess until someone gets enough experience in the water to really internalize this idea that there's not a shark around every corner, and if there were, it wouldn't bother me anyway. So, that's really all I can say. It's really a non-issue from a true perspective.
Yeah, I think the times I've been uncomfortable with sharks in the water have been a few times diving in the Gulf Coast off Florida, where the charter boats had a lot of spear fishermen on. And
Yes.
The sharks had a different behavior about them that I wasn't accustomed to. I hadn't been on a boat with a bunch of people spearfishing. That was a much different experience.
I could not agree with you more. The only time I have ever had, quote, problems with sharks is when either I or someone was spearfishing across the board. When there is a flailing, dying, bleeding fish around, surprise, surprise, a predator is going to come in for an easy meal, and they're going to see anything around it as a potential competitor. So I don't know why, operators allow spearfishing on the same trips as the people who don't want to spearfish, but that's not as common as it used to be, but I can sympathize with you there.
Yeah, sadly, I'm a victim of the movie Jaws. I'm still convinced there's sharks in swimming pools or sharks in swimming pools because of that movie. So it was nice that you opened up the session with that. It brought back a lot of memories. So thank you.
Kind of hitting on that point, there was an article, I believe, in the Divers Alert Network magazine, I want to say maybe a year ago, and it did talk about a diver who had an incident with a shark because they were doing a shark feeding dive, and it was not the shark's fault. The diver didn't follow the instructions of the instructor that was with them. They gave them very specific instructions and everyone else followed them and was fine, but this particular diver didn't and had an incident. So I think that if there are ever any incidents with divers, it's usually the diver's fault and not the shark's fault. So yeah, I do think it's rare. But yeah, Alex, can you kind of hit on that in the last couple of minutes, just kind of maybe the controversies on shark feeding dives or whether they're good or bad?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. In fact, it was in chapter 10 of my book on responsible wildlife interaction. I used that chapter as a platform to kind of address this issue of feeding, or what we call provisioning. And the bottom line from my research is that there is literature to support either side. There probably is no across the board yes or no answer. It probably varies according to location and species, etc. So it is something that I think researchers have to continue to look at. My own perspective, I don't object to feeding dives. I've been on a couple. To me, it really comes down to what does a diver want to, if that's something that you want to do, then fine. But many divers also feel that it's a contrived, almost kind of a carnival experience, and they don't like it. And so it is controversial. But as I said, I don't think there is actually some literature, more than you might think, on this issue. And as I said, there are cases I know in the Bahamas where one study showed that it had no impact on migratory patterns with tiger sharks, and it had no significant impact on the feeding of Caribbean reef sharks. But then there are other studies, other parts of the world that have different things. So we don't really have the ability to say yes it's good or yes it's bad definitively. And I think the bottom line is you need to make an assessment as to what you feel is appropriate, and that's pretty much as much as I can say. In the back of my book as well, there is the references, and if you want to look at some of this source literature, it's out there. It's quite interesting, but I think it may be beyond the scope of interest for most people.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you for another wonderful presentation, and thank you everyone for joining. If you have additional questions, please reach out to Alex at brylske@me.com. I know it could be intimidating sending him questions, but he is more than happy to answer them. So if you think of any
Absolutely.
questions, please write his email down and go ahead and shoot him an email with your questions. This webinar is... Oh, go ahead. Sorry, what was that, Alex?
I'm just saying, please consider me a resource. Just, it's, hopefully this is more than our spending an hour together. I welcome any feedback and input questions.
Thank you so much for that. This webinar is recorded, so it will be going up on our Diventures website and also our Diventures YouTube channel. So feel free to go back and watch it if you want, or pass it along to your friends and family. We really hope you can join us next month as well for our Becoming an Ocean Steward episode. And just reach out to him with any questions. And thanks again for joining us this afternoon.
Take care, folks. Thank you.